welcome back to The Full View. The Inkatha Freedom Party President Inkosi Mangosuthu Buthelezi says the past 10 years have revealed that the trust is lacking in many political parties, but that his party has a good track record and remains corruption-free. Launching the IFP manifesto at the Chatsworth Stadium in Durban earlier, Buthelezi unveiled their election message, which calls on South Africans to simply trust us. Joining us to unpack the manifesto, political analyst Ralph Mathekga here with me in our Joburg studios, and hopefully later on we'll be speaking to Lukhona Mnguni in our Durban studios. So trust us to get the economy working, trust us to promote social cohesion, trust us to be tough on crime, trust us to fight gender-based violence, trust us to promote responsible reform, and so he goes on. But the question is, interestingly enough, he invokes, President of the IFP, that even in his time as a leader of the homeland, they have an excellent track record. No one in his administration at the time, including himself, was accused of corruption in that 19 years. Is that historically correct, Ralph Mathekga?
Good evening, Tepiso. Thanks for inviting me. I think that the diagnosis of the breakdown of trust in society, it's a correct one. I mean, we know the effect of corruption, and we know that usually when you have corruption, trust tend to decline. But I was also surprised as well listening to the speech when Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi was reflecting back to the time of the IFP in those days. Actually, he's referring back to a very controversial time of the IFP, and everybody will agree that things have went wrong recently when it comes to corruption and so forth. But I really have doubts as to whether the extent to which we have had corruption, does it really provide a platform to go back and then say that people did it well during those days? And particularly when it comes to...
I also wondered about that. Is it a historical to say even back then the ANC, of which I was a part of, was telling me that if I were to be approached to be a homeland leader, I should definitely say yes and go against the grain of what we're fighting for?
No, this is a very unfortunate attempt to rewrite history. You cannot rewrite history to that extent, and I have to make it very clear. My sense is, having read history and everything, the IFP's past is very controversial. The role that has been played by the IFP, controversial as well. You read literature around and so forth. There are always this literature coming around pointing to allegations of violence that it's said to have been perpetrated by the IFP, is said. And I'm saying allegations and as being reported. But the question of trust now, I think that maybe what they should do, they should focus on how to build trust now. Forget about going back to that history. That is a controversial history that I think one would do without going back to, and the IFP actually could do well without necessarily going back to.
Okay, so we'll look at the fine print, the finer points, and through the various themes, but just looking at the IFP and its support base, we spoke about the fact that this was launched at Chatsworth, and that's significant in trying to reach out to the Indian vote. But more importantly, can it garner more votes nationally beyond its typical support base in just KwaZulu-Natal broadly?
The IFP has not done very well when it comes to presenting itself as a party at national level. They have cemented their presence as a regional party. They worked very hard as a regional party, and I don't think they are spreading themselves nationally even. Of course, maybe they are being realistic here. You know, when you're going into the elections, you've got to decide as to where do you focus, where are you likely to get more returns when it comes to where you're going to invest.
Realistic or more nuanced that it's identity politics?
It's I will agree with you, nuanced to some extent and also realistic. The reality is that smaller parties such as the IFP, first of all, they don't have money to campaign equally across the country. That is just a fact that they have to deal with here. And now they are focusing on KZN. Probably if they regain that trust in KZN, if they demonstrate that they can actually govern in KZN, maybe they'll be able to make a case that they need to be trusted at national level. But you cannot just call for trust. I mean, you need to be clear as to what is it that you are going to do to end trust. You cannot just declare that you need trust back from the nation and so forth. There need to be clear sense of the specifics. What is it that they are going to do to end trust? Are they
let's
going to
talk
build
specifics
bridges with
then.
communities? What is it that they are going to do to end back that trust?
So let's talk specifics on the economy. The IFP leader saying earlier on that when they were in governance, he and his administration, during that time of the homeland, there was not a penny spent that was stretched or that went missing, saying on a shoestring budget. Let's just listen to some of what he had to say on the economy.
We should be seeing high-profile leaders jailed for looting the state. We should be getting apologies. Instead, it's business as usual. Well, the Zondo Commission brings us one revelation after another of deeply entrenched corruption. I can tell you, my comrades, I weep for my country. The ruling party has put up billboards everywhere saying grow South Africa. But under their leadership, our economy continues to shrink. Growth has stagnated and jobs are being lost. This can be changed. I've told you today of many things the IFP has done with your support to govern South Africa with integrity and excellence. We have a good track record that anyone can see. So trust us. This is why you can trust us, because our record speaks for itself. For the IFP, the development of an inclusive economy is an absolute priority. This is about human dignity. We need to get our nation working to alleviate poverty, redress inequality, empower families, and fulfill the rightful aspirations of our people. All of them. And one of the ways we will do that is by focusing on local economic development, supporting small businesses and public and private partnerships. We want an unemployment register in every municipality to match job seekers to available jobs. Through the establishment of a Department of Youth and Job Creation, strategies can be put in place to assist both job seekers and the workforce to overcome obstacles like lack of transport, for instance. We need to remove all the obstacles to people finding jobs. That includes lowering the cost of data to make access to the internet and email affordable for everyone.
IFP leader Mangosuthu Buthelezi on some of the proposals that they're making on the economy. We'll look at that in just a moment. But I just do want to welcome Lukhona Mnguni, our analyst in our Durban Studios. He's here with us now. Very good evening to you. Ralph Mathekga with me here in our Johannesburg studios. Mr. Mnguni, perhaps your first impression of whether or not the IFP succeeded in general, especially on the message of corruption, to woo more voters and voters beyond the KwaZulu-Natal province.
Good afternoon, evening, Tsepiso. Well, I'm not too sure whether their strongest point was on corruption. What I picked up, though, having interacted with both documents, the manifesto and the speech delivered by Prince Buthelezi, is that the speech is much more comprehensive than the manifesto itself. So that's the first thing. So I'd advise anybody who really wants to know what the IFP is about to read the speech rather than the manifesto. I think everybody harps on this issue of corruption. It's a low-hanging fruit. You've got the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into state capture. You've got other various commissions, for example, the one around the PIC. Recently, a report on the State Security Agency has been been published. So you've got a number of processes that are happening under the Ramaphosa administration. So I don't think for any opposition party it is a good way to pin your hopes on the fact that you come out strongly on corruption, because the ANC now has a leader who is quite believable that he's doing something about corruption, and unless you poke holes on that belief that the general society seems to have, that, you know, the current president is doing all in his power to clean up,
in fact,
I don't
Mr.
think
Mnguni,
you are
allow
doing
me
yourself
to come
the most
in on
justice.
that one, because it had me wondering that if there was a time that the ANC was accused of failing the public by having a particular type of leader and is now supposedly better off with changing faces, is the same then not true for those who are looking to vote for the IFP, that you feel the current president, Inkosi Buthelezi, as the candidate, and yet he has endorsed a particular leader? How does that work for the electorate?
Look, this endorsement of a leader whose election becomes ever so evasive, I don't know whether it helps the electorate really, because what would have helped the electorate this year is, one, Prince Buthelezi appearing to really be giving up the reins of power to a new leader, a younger leader, a different generation, who probably will appeal even to newer constituencies. A leader like Prince Buthelezi, whether he's good or bad, is neither here nor there. When you've been incumbent for too long, you tend to eventually not appeal to particular sections of the electorate that might find that you are hogging space too much. And I think it's that hurdle that the IFP has not managed to cross. So whenever there's a promise of the current president stepping down, it just never happens. It continues to be evasive. So of course, if you were to look on the other side with the ANC, whether changing faces mean the party has changed, of course, I've been very clear on that. You need to evaluate any organization holistically. You can't just look at what I call the aesthetic. Who the leader is the aesthetic. Okay. What the culture of the movement becomes when that leader takes over, how the movement re-emerges out of a crisis and reimagines itself, sets itself on a new paradigm holistically, is what we should look at, and that's what I call the substantive. And so, I mean, if we look only to leaders, of course, yes, we will have a problem of reducing a party just to who is at the helm, but we've got to look much further than that. But on the question of the IFP, I do think the question of who leads it now and going forward is becoming ever so important, particularly if they want to explore different constituencies that have
Lukhona, I'm going to come in on this in just a moment, and Ralph, you're going to comment on it. You raised a very interesting point. You say that the speech is actually a little bit more detailed than the manifesto, and I was looking at it as well in terms of some of the issues that it proposes. It seems that there is a lack of detail, but one of the things that the IFP raises is that it's very clear that the economic salvation promised by political freedom has not materialized, that what is really missing here is the right value system. Is it as simple as that to grow an economy?
Well, look, to do anything that is governance related, you do need a great leadership pedigree that understands public morality, that values transparency and accountability to society, a cohort of leaders who really embody the values enshrined in our constitution about what the collective mandate of government is to society. The IFP is actually, I call it a sub-theme in actual fact of their theme that says trust us, Setembe, which is really derived from the fact that they saying they are offering a cohort of leaders that are untainted, incorruptible, and leaders who will serve society rather than their own interests. Of course, the electorate doesn't have too great a memory of an IFP in power, at least at the level of the province, because they left the seat of power in 2004. It has been 15 years since, so I'm not too sure what the reference point for the electorate is meant to be, whether it is the municipalities that they've been in charge of, at least prior to 2016, and then the ones they regained leadership of after 2016. But of course, they too have been embroiled in some of the municipalities. If you go to Escort, for example, where one of the officials, Mayor Speaker, was arrested. I don't want to commit because my memory is failing me now. But one of the top officials was arrested for planning to kill one of the other officials that were quite senior in that municipality. So they don't always come across as so good and so clean, and yet they do pin their hopes. I think they pin their hopes on the leadership stature of Prince Buthelezi, in terms of how, I think in his speech he spoke about how they are the voice of reason. You know that when he stands up in parliament, whether he has been recognized or not, he stands up and then he gets recognized and then he says something and everybody sort of listens to him. I think it's that leadership stature that they want to tap into. But whether the electorate is only looking for that sense of maturity when they offer him as a presidential candidate is to be seen. I think leaders today must demonstrate greater innovation, greater vision, and just resonance with the broader electorate for them to probably be electable.
Ralph Mathekga, just on the economy, some of what Inkosi Buthelezi was suggesting is the lowering of costs for data, making internet more accessible to everyone in order to create more jobs. Surely that is nothing new. A lot of political parties have put this to the fore, but they do say that there is a need for a Department of Youth and Job Creation. Is there a need for such a ministry if we're to deal with the challenges facing, one dare say, one of the majority of the demographics in South Africa?
Well, the broader system, the broader political system in South Africa should function in a way that it actually deals with the issues that concern majority, and majority happens to be younger people in this country. So it means that the broader system, if it functions well, it should address the concern that younger people have. I'm concerned about the manner in which they use trust here. Trust, it's a product of policy. You need to adopt policies, and if you adopt policies that actually lift people out of poverty, and if you adopt specific policies, you then will have social cohesion and trust and so forth. I find it very difficult that you can just want to build a political project by saying, I'm going to wake up and build trust, without telling us about the policies, specific details when it comes to the policies. I was listening to the speech today, and as I was listening to Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, he says that the manifesto provide details and he's not going to go into that. I spent almost half a day trying to find those details on internet. I went to the IFP website. Maybe I thought I could find some of the robust proposals, but yet I don't find anything. So I share similar sentiment with my colleague that actually it appears that outside the speech you don't see any details elsewhere that are being provided here. But I'm concerned about how this manifesto is actually pitched. I have to put it out there that if you had a younger leader presenting the manifesto of the IFP, will not ramble all along about
days gone by.
Days gone by. Will not ramble about the homelands. Everyone who has read the history of this country know that the homelands were just corrupt, and there was not even sufficient information. Actually, there was not even reporting of what has happened by then. Of course, now because of the disenchantment, the dissatisfaction that people are having with the current system, corruption and so forth, there tend to be nostalgia that you can reinstate stability from that time of the homeland. For me, it's a failure to think forward. How do you deal with a complex society where people will travel from KZN to Limpopo and so forth? How do you come up with a national project that will talk to people across, instead of this what I call succinct messages of nostalgia of secessionism, if you like? That's what I get from the speech, that we've done well in the past and so forth. That's not true in my mind, and what we have read, actually, you cannot make a case that says you cannot draw much from the time of the homeland now as a way to deal with the current impasse. I think that is just a demonstration that the leadership of the IFP need to change this.
Are you saying it's out of touch?
Out of touch, an attempt to rewrite history. and not so useful for campaigning if you're looking into this election.
So I want us to drill down to some of the specifics, others, and I say that in quotes because as you've both said, there wasn't too much details on this, but I'd like you to both answer this question, and I'll start with you, Ralph Mathekga, on having an unemployment register in every municipality. Is this going to do anything that the census or the Labour Department, the Labour surveys don't do? How helpful would this be?
I mean, do we need another inventory as to how many people are unemployed? Do we still need to understand the patterns of unemployment in South Africa? There's a great deal of data that is available there, and having this unemployment registry, what new is it going to provide? Are we not aware of the extent of unemployment, the fact that majority of unemployed people happen to be young black people? That information is out there, and I think that this time that we have now, it's not the time for further diagnosis. The problem has been diagnosed. We have agreed with what is being stated out there when it comes to the diagnosis. The question is, what are the intervention mechanisms that political parties can actually bring to deal with this? No further diagnosis is useful at this point in time.
Okay, Lukhona Mnguni, your response to this, are they trying hard to be inventive at all?
Well, look, the idea of unemployed youth registries isn't new. Generally, municipalities should have some form of a youth desk by now. Youth development managers, they call them in some municipalities. They already exist, and they do build a database. It's part of their mandate to do that. At times, when we go out to conduct research, the easiest port of call is to go to a municipality and try and get a number of unemployed youth who are within the wards in which you will be conducting your research, and you train them and use them as your field workers. So that type is already there. What I found important in what they stated is to think more and harder about how do you make job seeking less expensive in South Africa, particularly questions around transportation of the youth to job seeking opportunities. I'll make an example. You've got a village somewhere in Qumbu. It's 25 rands to go to the nearest town, which is Qumbu. Probably you need to go and look for work in Umtata. So you take 25 rands to Qumbu and then some other money from Qumbu to Umtata, and then you must return. That is too expensive a cost to someone who's unemployed in a fairly remote area. So what is it that you can do as a government to alleviate the burden on the job seeker? And we've been in some circles thinking of even simple things, certification of documents, where you probably need to look at bringing it closer to communities. We're going to be piloting using school principals as commissioners of oath, and probably use schools as well, especially those that have internet connection, as centers that can actually help young people in remote areas to look for employment. But that one I find an important point of discussion, but as Ralph and I seem to agree, there isn't enough detail in terms of how that will be carried out. But I think as a point of conversation, it is an important point of conversation that we can have as a nation.
Something that is a point of conversation is the issue of land. Buthelezi said his party believes that land expropriation is necessary. We affirm the Constitution and its belief that there should be some level of compensation. Now, I know that the great debate in this election is undoubtedly expropriation of land without compensation. This is what he said. Let's listen some more.
The IFP understands that the resolution of the land issue is important and carries with it a promise of healing the wounds of the past. Land has social, spiritual, and economic value. It has the potential to be the foundation of the renewed economy our country so critically needs. In keeping with our approach of a long-term vision, the IFP wants to create a training infrastructure to ensure that the land can become productive. I get very depressed when I travel in the KwaZulu-Natal, when I travel in the Eastern Cape, when I travel in all our rural provinces, to find that since 1994, our people are not tilling the land at all, and yet food security is a priority, and that families are now dependent on the social grants that are given to all pensioners, and that people are not producing any food at all, even for themselves, let alone to sell. And 17 million people are already depending on social grants. And that is not sustainable. So this means introducing agricultural science at school level and reopening agricultural training colleges. We believe that all unused land that, as I speak now, is in the hands of government should be allocated to assist the poor.
So that's the IFP's president speaking there. Let's take you back to our conversation with our analysts Ralph Mathekga and Lukhona Mnguni. I just want to talk about what has become controversial, the Ingonyama Trust, and the IFP has weighed in on this. And I'm talking about this against the backdrop of what Mr. Buthelezi said, talking about unused land, how it should be used and how that should be allocated. The IFP's opinions of land in this country and who it's allotted to and what belongs to, has it helped the conversation of land going forward, Mr. Mnguni?
Well, I mean, there are two issues. Firstly, the one on land expropriation without, actually three issues. Land expropriation without compensation. The IFP is quite clear in its manifesto that it will achieve land expropriation with compensation. So it's not even a thing where they are dilly-dallying on. They want land expropriation with compensation. On the Ingonyama Trust, they do feel that the King Goodwill Zwelithini is being unfairly victimized for political reasons, and that there's nothing wrong with leaving land in the hands of communities by way of custodianship by kings and chiefs. And I think with where the Ingonyama Trust is concerned, they don't wish to see it being tampered with. The third issue is the one on all state land being given to poorer South Africans so that they can establish themselves. I am often very critical of this viewpoint. I do believe that the state must strategically hold land in its hands so that for future projects the state wouldn't have to procure land at exorbitant prices that wouldn't make financial sense to the fiscus. So we can't expect that all land that is held by the state, and a number of political parties like garnering support on this point, that all state land must actually be handed out. I don't believe that. If you've got a state with a vision of what it wants to achieve in 20 years time, in 50 years time, it will keep land strategically. But on the issue of Ingonyama Trust, I think it was once controversial, probably last year. It seems all political parties have shied away from it for sake of political expediency, so that they cross over the 8th of May without getting any resistance or being decampaigned by the king and those that support him. But as we will remember, the Ingonyama Trust issue emanates from the Kgalema Motlanthe high-level panel report, which was a study commissioned by Parliament. And it problematizes the Ingonyama Trust Act. And you will know, of course, CASAC has taken the Ingonyama Trust to court over the issue of wanting to turn around permission to occupy PTOs documents into lease agreements that would expire in about plus minus 40 years time. So there is a lot that is that should be debated about the Ingonyama Trust, because it does place some of the livelihoods in our rural areas of KwaZulu-Natal in a precarious position. But politicians have shied away, and I do think that how the IFP enters the debate is sort of, yes, against the popular grain. But I mean, of course, the political party is allowed to say we are holding firm to our traditions, and I see nothing wrong if they were to be positioned that way, that say we don't care about the populist view in society or the popular view in society. We will remain from our standpoint in terms of what we believe should happen.
Hold the thought, Lukhona Mnguni. Let me come to you, Ralph Mathekga, very quickly on this. The IFP suggesting high-rising approach where land is limited. In a situation where the South African government is actually still unsure as to how much land it owns, how practical is this?
Well, that is a difficulty. You did a very reliable inventory as to how much land is in possession of the state, and the state, that's where you begin in the first place. I mean, you got to determine your assets before. That should be the basics of economics. But a very quick one. What I hear from what they're saying here, It's not necessarily a land reform. They've got a land redistribution. You can redistribute, you can take. Whether you compensate or not, you can do it straightforward. But land reform should entail a redistribution with an intention to bring about economic integration. I don't see that. I mean, the IFP is in a province that is predominantly rural. That is the area where you really need rural economic development program as an integral part of this land issue that is coming out. I don't see the programs. I don't see any clear suggestion as to what are they going to do with regard to that, just rural economic development. I hear about redistribution. That is not an issue in my mind.
I wanted us to look at health and education, but I want us to focus on crime. Let's listen to what he had to say earlier.
The IFP believes that education is a necessary condition for sustainable, effective development. Education is the most potent tool with which to breach inequalities of our society. It is the most potent tool to place our people at the center of our move into the future and to secure our rightful place in the global community. We therefore champion free, quality early childhood development, primary, secondary, and higher education and training for all our people, so that our children don't get to school exhausted and hungry. The IFP insists on free scholar transport and effective nutrition schemes in all public schools. We have to give our children the best possible chance at achieving their potential. That also means securing better pay and better working conditions for all our teachers, including grade R teachers, to ensure that teachers are well motivated and supported. The IFP believes in building partnerships with communities in order to fight crime. We also believe that there is need for specialized courts and specialized police units to deal with corruption, sexual and gender-based violence, gangs, and drug-related crimes. In fact, when it comes to drugs, we want to employ the defense force along our borders to curb cross-border smuggling and illicit trade in drugs, as well as weapons, as well as wildlife trafficking and human trafficking. South Africa needs to get tough on crime with increased minimum sentences and hard labor for prisoners. We must get tough in fighting abuse of women and children. This should be classified as a serious crime by our justice system. It is completely unacceptable that South Africa is spending more on a prison inmate than they are spending on a woman in a shelter who has fled from abuse. The vulnerable must be protected if we are to call ourselves a free and caring society.
Okay, Lukhona Mnguni, just very quickly to wrap up. I know it doesn't give you much time, big topics to talk about, but decentralizing the police ministry, increasing minimum sentences, how practical are just some of those suggestions on dealing with crime?
Well, I think they tap into ongoing debates. You will know that there is a massive debate between metro and municipal police departments, and whether they should be integrated to provinces or vice versa, that you should give greater autonomy to metro officers. I think it's for me there is a lack of focus just on the quality and the type of officer, law enforcement officer that we need in South Africa. Okay. Much of what we have are highly corruptible law enforcers who do not respect the law themselves. I mean, you just have to drive around and check how many police officers drive with their seat belts on to realize that law enforcement officers themselves don't inspire abidance with the law among the greater populace of the citizens. But I think, yes, he touched a lot on other issues in terms of looking at education, and as he was talking on that clip. And I think what was disappointing, and what is disappointing, is that there's absolutely nothing on higher education at a time when we are still continuing to see higher education move from crisis to crisis, without necessarily achieving greater stability. And
Lukhona Mnguni, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Chair, including you, Ralph Mathekga. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so lots to talk about, so little time. We'll be back after the 8 o'clock news, but let's listen to some tweets coming from some of our viewers. This one is from Lukasa saying, at least the manifesto was convinced, but I'm not going to vote for IFP. Mr. Mangosuthu should resign and give youth to lead organization. More youth will follow. And this final one is from Olani Wekazi saying, I'm not convinced at all. It will never be able to solve the problems facing South Africans. I won't vote for it. Hashtag full view. Thanks to all of you. And we'll take a quick break. As I said, we'll be back at 8. The big debate is up next.
And thanks so much for staying with Morning Live. He described